This is becoming, I think, a network of events, projects, and operational people across all industries, all looking for ways to develop further themselves, support one another, and steer a positive path in a future that is set to be lots of change and a bit more uncertainty. So I cannot even begin to tell you how excited I am to actually have Anita with us today. When I started this, I came back from traveling after a year, came back in the middle of COVID, and I came back to set up the Event Managers Project Manager series, as well as the Managers Movement. And it was actually Anita who inspired me to be risky, to steer the course that I knew was true to me, and to take the plunge to building these amazing communities. So to have her here today is an incredible, incredible thing for me. And it also, I think, shows the true power. We only met during, like, at the beginning of the COVID situation. She's become a very dear friend, but also an ally. And I think it really demonstrates for me the power of connection and relationships and networking hubs, like the one you're in now, but also Anita runs a fierce project management group, which we will link as part of this. So certainly if you're looking to delve into the project management world, it's a great community to be a part of, and surrounding yourself with people who are all on a similar journey to you, are trying to develop themselves and are trying to carve a path in a different way to what other people are doing. Surrounding yourself with those people, I think, helps on your own journey. So incredibly honored to have you here, Anita. So Anita describes herself as a misfit, an imposter, scaredy cat, and the founder of Fierce Project Management. And she's an almighty risk taker and a fabulous ally. So through her work, she empowers others to fiercely carve a career in project management in a way that is true to them and to embrace their difference. So welcome, Anita. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, because we've been talking about me coming on for ages and I just couldn't do a Thursday lunchtime. So I'm so excited that I'm finally here and get to meet everybody else as well. So brilliant.
So we always start these chats in the same way, Anita, but as the title of this was so risky, I've changed up the questions for you. So if you're ready, we're going to do a quick fire round.
I'm excited.
Let's go. Right. Finish the end of this sentence for me. Taking risks is
risky.
Ooh. You're on a cliff edge about to take a risk and you are scared as hell, but you know in your heart you were meant for more. What's the first thing you do?
Take a breath and then take a leap.
Love it. What was the most recent risk you took and why was it so risky for you?
So most recent was yesterday that I did my very first guest expert session. And so now this is my third of the week. But I've done interviews before and I kind of find them easier, but this was like me coming into a networking group and then just talking in the morning, and then in the afternoon I was doing a Facebook Live in somebody else's group. And it's always been on my, I want to do these, but it was out of my comfort zone, so it was a risk, and I did it, and I'm here now, and it doesn't feel, I'm not as nervous today. Also, I know you, so that makes it. Today is not a risk, but the ones yesterday felt a risk.
And you survived it. You're alive. You know, took a risk and made it through. Love it. Awesome. Well, I think we've set up the theme for the conversation today. So I'm going to hand over to Anita to share a few ideas with us, and then we'll have an opportunity to ask any questions and reflect. And yeah, so hand over to you, Anita.
Brilliant. So thank you so much for the introduction, Jay. And I met Jay just kind of pre-COVID, I think. We were in each other's world just on LinkedIn, and we were both, I think, fangirling each other without having actually spoken. And then Jay pops into my inbox one day, asked me a question. And then as COVID struck, I knew I wanted to build, I kind of felt like, how do I want to show up now and serve my community of project managers? And I knew that I wanted to just really build connection and provide a space where where I could support them and lead from the front. And I was like, who could help me? Like, who do I know that my group and I need the most? And I was like, we need Jay. Like, the world is so uncertain right now, so we need Jay. So I asked Jay to do a guest expert session in my group, and you were the very first person that I approached. And yeah, I'm so grateful that you said yes. And we learned so much, and it was, yeah, so I'm just massive fangirl, Jay, so really excited that I'm here and we're kind of returning the favour on this side. So what I will tell you a bit about me. I'm my background is as a project manager. It was about 10 years ago that I was doing my Prince 2. I was looking at like a Facebook memory came up the other day about how stressed I was doing my Prince 2. I'd actually fallen into project management a few years before that. And I say fallen into because I didn't know project management was a career back then. But I started delivering projects, worked out that, oh, this is a profession in its own right. And then did my Prince 2. That was my first bit of, oh, there's a bit of structure to what I'm doing rather than me just making it up as I go along. After that, and that was in a local authority. I was delivering park projects. I hit my ceiling where I was, and was ready for a change. Ended up in transport. Again, I say ended up because I really did not think I was going to go there. And when I first saw a job offer where it was a sponsored master's in project management, I was like, oh, I feel ready to study again. I'd really like to cement my knowledge in project management and like really create that foundation for my career. But it was in the railway. I was like, I can't imagine anything more boring. And then in the end, I went for it because the job, like, I hadn't found something else, and I saw the job advert again a few months later. I was like, God, I'll just go for it. And then I ended up in railway for over 8 years. And what was interesting about it at the time was that actually when I did my master's in project management, it was a sponsored scheme by a railway infrastructure company, and they were very much looking for people from different backgrounds. Like, that was their thing back then. It was like, we don't necessarily want all project managers who are engineers. They were actively looking for people from diverse backgrounds, which was awesome, and which was partly why I absolutely loved doing projects, because it is so diverse, and I genuinely believe that there are so many skills sets that you can bring to projects to make your own. Like, even though we have methodologies, I've spoken about Prince 2, I said I've done my master's in project management, I've done APMP as well, but that gives you a structure and processes, but really what you bring to projects is your own. Like, there is no one way to deliver projects. So that's why I absolutely love projects as a profession. One, because the variety of the projects you deliver is immense, but also that we don't have to be one type of person to deliver projects. But but in my career within railway, I felt like I was constantly hitting blocks of it is very risk averse as a culture, not surprisingly, because it's safety critical. So in that kind of culture, absolutely, for very good reason, they have to be risk averse. But they were also risk averse about changing things that weren't safety critical. And again, that was part of the culture, and I understood why. But when there were better ways to do things, it was difficult. When there were more innovative ways to do things, it was really difficult. And sometimes it was just like, why are we doing such inefficient processes? And it was just like, it was that frustration. And what the messages that I was being told were, oh, we really want to do things better. But when you'd come up with ideas, it felt like you were hitting a brick wall. And I felt like I was constantly coming up against the barrier of, this is the way we do things around here. But actually, particularly as a fresh-faced project manager, coming from, on one hand, they were saying we want difference, we want innovation. So that's what I was bringing with me. So I constantly did my best within those cultures and environments to find new ways and do things better. And even though I hit lots of brick walls, I did succeed in a number of areas. So I think we definitely need that, and I think that's a wonderful thing about projects, is that in environments which are business as usual, this is the way we do things around here, is when you come from a project angle, you are naturally bringing in different ways and different processes. So it's you know, finding those ways to do that effectively. But actually, for a long time in my career, I wasn't really taking risks. I felt like I was on a path to progress. I very much felt that I had my career path, my career journey was going to be within a corporate culture. And not that I'd never thought I would leave, but I didn't expect to be there for 8 years, but I thought I was going to climb the corporate ladder either in that environment or go elsewhere and get to a really senior position, because that's what I'm ambitious, and I make no apology for it. But over my time, kind of being in an environment where there was some of these challenges, my ambition started to ebb away, and a lot to do with, I started looking upwards, and there were no women around me, and there were women around me, but not in a senior position. I kind of I took a risk. I did take a risk, and I spoke to a senior manager, and I said, I'm ambitious and I want to reach the next career step. What do I have to do to make it happen? And he told me that I wasn't experienced enough. I wasn't ready yet, and I didn't have enough experience. And within that one sentence, I felt deflated. And we carried on talking, and I asked him, like, what was it that I wasn't ready about, and what specifically I needed. And the answer he gave me just didn't make sense to me. He said I needed more construction experience. And I was like, I've got more of that than a lot of your senior team. And I just couldn't make sense of what I needed to do to progress. So then I chose a different path, which was less risky. I kind of decided to stay in my comfort zone. I'd stopped pushing for a progression, but I started making career sideways steps. And that wasn't a bad thing in itself. Like, there were certain things that I wanted to get out of the next role, and I did that. But then I would stay in these roles for a lot longer than I'd got. Like, so for instance, I knew that I didn't have a lot of external stakeholder experience. So I was like, that's what I want for my next role. So I got that in my next role, but I still stayed in that role for a lot longer than what I needed to get that experience. And part of it was that I was just a bit like, I wasn't clear in what I needed to do to make that next step. And then I kind of given up a little bit, and I just took the easy, comfortable path. Also because I didn't really clearly know what I wanted. But then I took a massive risk after I became pregnant, took my maternity leave. I actually had postnatal depression, so I didn't even think about work, and I couldn't even put my washing away. But if you look at my washing now, you might think something similar, but different causes now. But like, I was just overwhelmed by it. But actually, I had a decision to face about work, because I was in a team that were at risk of being made redundant. And so I had to kind of face that decision just as I was coming out of postnatal depression. And I was worried about my little one and what it would be like going back to work, and I was still breastfeeding, and those kind of things were playing on my mind as well. But I did go back to work, which I'm really glad I did, actually, because it showed me everyone was fine, and that it was okay. But also I did make that decision to take the redundancy, and that was a huge risk for me, because I was in a company where I was already working flexibly way before I had my little boy, and I knew that flexible working was still going to be really important to me. But I decided to take that risk because I knew that my heart wasn't in it anymore. I knew I wanted to do something different. I didn't exactly know what, but I knew I was ready to move on, and I felt like staying because it's flexible is a bit of a shitty reason. But actually, I had to, like, as part of the redundancy process, it was like, you have to apply for jobs, and then if you get them, you will stay. But if you don't get them, you might be allowed to take your redundancy. So I actually decided that, like, do you know what? If I'm going to stay, if I'm going to apply for any jobs, that they're going to be a promotion. And bear in mind, I'm just coming back from maternity leave, and I've barely spoken to an adult for about 15 months. But that they were the only jobs I applied for were promotions, or I was like, either I get promoted or I leave. And I got really close to getting promotion. They ended up going for somebody else who had more experience, ironically enough. But actually, they said that I was so close that if that person had applied, I would have got it. And it was a great interview. And so I was like, gosh, I've just been sitting on my laurels for 5 years when I knew that I could have got that promotion if I'd pushed myself harder, if I'd tried it earlier. But I knew I was ready to do something different. And I started to explore, this is when I first kind of ventured the world of coaching. But I started to explore what was important to me, what my values were, what the options were. And I was actually coming up against quite a big block about this flexibility, wanting to be flexible, being a mum, making that even more important, but then also being ambitious, because my ambition was coming back. I was like, how do I do both those things? And in this industry, in this profession, it's not impossible. I know that. But I was also hearing messages that, you know, maybe you have to put one on hold to do the other, and you can't do both at the same time. I was like, oh, that's not where I am now. I've been comfortable for 5 years. I know I've got a baby now, but that's not what's important to me. No, sorry, it's very important to me, but both things are important to me. I don't want to be comfortable for another 5 years. So I started exploring, and this is when the idea of being an entrepreneur, the seed got planted, but it felt like too big a risk, if I'm honest. I was like, gosh, it feels like too big a risk, and I wasn't ready quite to do it then. So I ended up contracting for a bit longer and actually trying to find flexible working opportunities as a job role, either as a permanent or as a contractor, was difficult. But I did find a role through a connection through my allies to get a contract role. And the role was massively in my comfort zone. And it was, I just remember, I wasn't a project manager in that role. I was doing assurance, and assurance has its place, but that is not my place. And I just remember, but it was also, again, fighting against some of these cultures of, you know, some of the inefficient ways to do things. And I just kept seeing all these biases, like it was so obvious, and like it was just so apparent. And I was just getting more and more frustrated by it, because my eyes were opened up to this stuff, and this is what I'd realised my passion was about, is about equality and fairness and how women are treated in male-dominated industries sometimes. But also I was starting to see racism and things, not necessarily directed at me, but within this culture. But interestingly enough, it was the most racially diverse team I've been in, but there was obvious racism. Or I say obvious, but when you can see it, it was obvious, but not everybody saw it. But what was interesting was that I was just sitting in a meeting, and I decided it was quite a toxic culture, and people were shouting. It was about like who could shout the loudest. And I decided, like, I'm going to shout the loudest in this meeting. I decided, you know, I'm going to be ballsy and I'm going to shout the loudest. And so I was. So when somebody was shouting, I was not quite shouting, but I was being vocal and being loud. And at one point, this guy started laughing. And he was like, "Who does Anita think she is? A project manager here?" And I was like, "Oh my God, I've got a decade of project management experience. I am a project manager, and you guys are laughing." And I was just like, oh, it was just ridiculous. But in the end, I decided to take the risk about leaving. And a few things had happened, and I was just like, do you know what? I'm going to do this risk. And so I did. So I left, and also kind of told them some fierce truths as I was leaving, but they didn't. But still not burning any bridges while I was doing it, but they didn't necessarily want to hear what I was saying. But that was down to them. But I took the risk, and I just started up on my own. That was last summer. And it was completely aligned with what I really wanted to do, which was before I knew what my business was, I knew that it was about women in project management. And I knew that before I admitted it to other people, but I knew that was where my heart was. So my first risks were investing in myself, getting the support, so I knew how to do it. knew what to do. And for me, that was about like one of the first things I did was start showing up on social media and start sharing my truths in that way, some of my story. But also I knew it wasn't about my story. I knew it was about other women. And so I did a survey with 100 women and I was sharing what they were saying. And a lot of the same messages were coming up about not being heard, not being taken seriously, and not having access to opportunities. And that's what ultimately became Fierce Project Management, which was about giving women in particular a space where they could be heard, be taken seriously, and have access to opportunities. But also giving them the skills and to do that, overcoming the imposter syndromes that might come up, overcome it, like actually taking the action and taking the risks to stretch out their comfort zone and having those fierce conversations. So I talk about, some of the things that women can do, but that's not, I never mean to dismiss some of the structural biases that are out there, because they are very real. But also, as women, we aren't victims in these systems. There is a lot that we can do, and also decide. And some of the women I work with decide to walk away, and that's ultimately what I've done as well from a particular toxic culture, and acknowledging that's okay as well, because sometimes we can feel like it's we've got a duty to stay. We've got a duty to stay and change that culture. We've got a duty to stay and prove our worth, and it will be a sign of weakness to leave. But actually, the risk worth taking is the right risk for you, and sometimes that is leaving these cultures before you start changing who you are. So for instance, I told you I was started to get shouty in that meeting, and that was a part of the reason that I decided to leave, because I was like, that's not me, that's not who I want to be, that's not how I lead. But I feel like I'm having to change in this culture. So I absolutely love projects, and I still am a project manager, but now I'm a project manager in my own business. It's lots of fun in lots of ways, but also it's has different challenges, and not necessarily having somebody to be accountable to, and not having a team as much are probably the biggest challenges. But I get to do the things that I absolutely love. And for me, I work with women who make powerful impacts, and so I work with women in the corporate in project management, who just by being there and with their difference and owning their misfit, they are creating change and huge impact. So I absolutely love that I get to support them to do that. So for tactic, I'm just looking at Jay's notes. The tactics of fiercely being you and carving the career you want. So absolutely, what I kind of started to realize this summer was that actually the story of not fitting in was something that I was beginning to own. Like, it was like, actually, if I look back, there is like way back before I was a project manager, there were like, I do not fit in my family. Like, you look at my family, you're like, how are you from that family, Anita? But so there's definitely been that experience before I became a project manager, but certainly being a woman in a male dominated space, and not that in itself is a challenge, but the culture that comes with was definitely a challenge. And there were times throughout that I felt like I didn't fit in, and sometimes I felt like I fitted in until I didn't, and then I would hear messages about how I needed to be, and how I needed to be as a manager and as a leader in particular. And I said that I was surrounded by women until I looked upwards. At one point I was even managing a team of all women in a male dominated environment, so it was unusual when it was a talking point. And I was like, this is awesome, because it's an empowering moment that we can talk about, actually we have all teams of men and nobody bats an eyelid. But then we got a nickname and it was expletive, and I'm like, oh crap. It was like, gosh, I started to notice the biases and the words that were being used. And then as a manager, I was just getting messages of, you're too much of a ball breaker, you're too patronizing, and you're too sensitive. And like, just throughout, I just kept getting these messages. And then I started questioning myself. But the more I questioned, I was like, but I'd asked for evidence, and the evidence was really weak. And it was like, not that I couldn't get the feedback, but I was like, you wouldn't be given this feedback if I was a man in this industry. Like, it wouldn't be the same messages. And why am I questioning myself and rather than owning what I do? So and that was a big reason that I kind of I believe I stayed comfortable, because I didn't go for those promotions, because I started to see that it was going to be harder for me as a woman. And I didn't even think of it as a woman of colour, because I was like, there just aren't any. Like, I'm not even going to think about that as a senior position, because there just weren't any. But they started to I stayed in my comfort zone, because when I did look at the managers, I was like, I'm in one particular team, I was like, they all play poker together. I've never been invited to poker. And that doesn't mean that I couldn't have got there, because when I spoke to my boss when I was leaving, he was like, oh gosh, you're really capable. Yeah, if you told me you wanted a promotion, we could have done something about that a lot sooner. And you're like, yeah, I was just sitting too comfortably. But so there was an element of a truth to it, but there was also stories that were at play. So to answer the question about tactics for fiercely being you and carving the career you want, is actually to embrace what being you is, and yes, you will hear these messages, but within those moments, actually, to what I talk about is switching the message of actually what is it that you like, how real is that message, and what do you need to hear instead. And if you're not hearing that from other people, then tell yourself that message. And you can then spread that message of difference for the people that you lead and in the environments that you're in. So I talk about women, but it's not just about women. It's like anyone with difference, we can hear messages about what we need to be to fit in, and men will hear those messages as well. So what can we do to switch the message on difference? And then that would enable us to be more of ourselves, and create those cultures of belonging for others. So it can be really difficult when you're hearing these messages, but actually, just like I say, it's not a just, but owning what we do, taking the compliments and owning those, like focus on the strengths of what we do. It's not about that we can't hear the criticisms and the weaknesses, but we can choose what to do with them. We don't have to take those messages as we need to own them. We can hear them and say, no, that's not me, and that's okay as well. So a lot of my message is about taking the risk, and for being fierce is about going for the opportunities and creating them. So I really think it's really powerful to get known for your strengths and get known for what you're good at, and get known for the impact and the difference that you create and that you want to create. So that's why when we went into COVID, I knew that we were going through a really uncertain time. The person that I wanted to talk to was Jay. I was like, I know Jay for what she does around change. So Jay was the person that I wanted to speak to. And I think we can do that in our careers. Like, we can get known, we can amplify our message and get known for what we do well and what we want to do and the impact that we want to create. And that's how we can carve the career that we want, by focusing on those things, getting clear in what we want, and taking the risks to get ourselves, and building the allies that will help us and support us along the way. Because opportunities come to you when you are really clear. The power of allyship for my career, and I think it's just hugely important for all of us, is that, so I created what is now a group called the Fierce Project Management Allyship, because I think that when I was, as a woman in project management, one of the messages, like, so when I share my story about some of the things that I went through, or some of the experiences that I had, so many people will say, me as well, not quite the exact same story, but I've experienced something similar. And they will say, I thought it was just me. I thought I was alone. So there is just a power in knowing that you are not alone, and that it's not you. Like, when you're, like, sometimes it might be you, but a lot of the times it's not about you, it's about the culture and environment. And the power of allyship is that you know that you're not alone, that you have a support network. And I think when we are different, for whatever reason, we are a misfit amongst, and I use the term misfit as endearment. I think it's good to be a misfit, because if we were all the same, nothing would be better, right? So I think it's good to be different, but it can be lonely. And when you're hearing messages that means you don't fit in around here, then that can be really lonely. So finding a support network, finding where you belong is hugely important. And ultimately, I told you that I looked up in the senior leadership team, and they all played poker together. And that's perhaps not, how I would build my team, but allyship is really important, because that is how the world works. Like, it is about who you know. It is about who you know. It is about building those networks and those relationships. And that's where I see a lot of people through COVID having lost their job, and yes, you can spend a lot of your time applying for jobs, but so many jobs are going to be from your network rather than an advert. So allyship is where you get opportunities. And if you are really known for your thing, people will come to you, and they won't even create jobs for you, because they want you in their team and they want you doing what you're capable of. So I think absolutely, I know it can be a real challenge where where a lot of people here have come from a different industry, they've come for events, and you're moving into projects. But I think that you are not starting from scratch. You are bringing all of that with you, and that is your foundation. And yes, it's not exactly the same, but that's a strength again. Because like I said, when I got recruited into railway, it wasn't because I was a railway person. And it was the difference that I would bring with my fresh pair of eyes and that drive for doing things differently that I was recruited for. In practice, it became a bit harder when I was in the culture that didn't always want to do that, but that was still my strength. So what are your strengths? What are the things that you want to achieve and you want to do, and the things that you want to create? Because ultimately projects is about creating things, which I absolutely love. And build and get known for that, and get known for what you want to do and what you're building on, and keep building those relationships. So I think that's probably the biggest lesson, I think, in my kind of career is about carrying on building those allies and getting clear on what I'm about and what I want to do.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Anita. That was incredible. I've got notes and notes here. Just while the others are kind of thinking on any questions, we'll also go to reflections. So if you have any questions initially. Oh, Claire's gone off mute. She might have a question already. Do you have a question, Claire?
I've got a question. Yeah, I'm interested to know, Anita, so in the period that you've been freelancing, what kind of projects have you been doing, and what have you found has been, I'm interested, the piece you talked about, like tapping into your network. Can you give us some examples of how you've kind of got to pieces of work that you've done in that period?
Yeah, absolutely. So in Fierce Project Management, a lot of what I do is about coaching women in project management, but also women in business to get out their comfort zone, take the risks and take the leap. So through building my profile online, I've connected to people like Jay. I connect with other people who then will make recommendations to me. So they know me for fierceness. Now they know me for I talk about misfits. So the other day I put a post, I was like, what do you know me for? And they're like, being risky, misfits, and being fierce. And actually, I don't even think that I'm necessarily very risky or that I'm very fierce, but it's what I need the most. And that's what I empower other people to do. And to do that, I need to lead by example. But tapping into my network, and one, it's being clear what I do, and using social media, so building my network on social media. So I don't always do this, but when I'm doing it well, is I actively add people who fit with who I want to work with. And if I was in a career, if I was looking for more corporate work, it would be in the companies that I wanted to work out. So I would actively add them. But I think it's really important to show up with my message online, so then people want to connect with me. They will look at my profile, they'll look at what I do and be like, yeah, I will connect with you because I can see why that fits with what I want to do, with what you're doing and what I do. I don't necessarily start conversations, but I do a lot of my message through my social media content. So over time, people get to know me. And of course, I'm not popping up in everybody's feed, but I got to know Jay through her messaging, and people get to know me. And then as you start building a relationship like that online, then I might message people, and like I messaged Jay, and I was like, oh, I've got an opportunity, hopefully it's an opportunity, but like a mutual benefit that we could have a conversation. So that, but you could also do more reach outs. I think there is, when it's completely cold and you don't know somebody, then that can be a challenge of them giving you your time. But actually, if you're starting to build a relationship, even just through content, then it's like, oh, that name's familiar. And even if it's when you're going for a job there, that name's familiar, it still holds weight. And then they look at your profile and you're talking. So for instance, one of the women that I worked with, she was so passionate about sustainability. So she was looking for jobs. That was her value. That was her job. That's what she was talking about. And she was getting new into project management. She was moving over, but that's what she was getting known for. And she was showing her expertise and her value. And she was asking, and that's who she was connecting with. But also, I've got corporate work, and I do sometimes freelance as a project manager, and that's fully through my network. I don't apply for jobs. I mean, I'm not saying that I wouldn't if I was actively looking, but at the times I wasn't actively looking, but it's been more of a conversation, like with a friend who's still in that industry, and she's like, oh, we're looking for a project manager. And I'm like, oh, I need something flexible. And then we'll have those conversations, and then she would put me forward for a job in her team. So that's happened to me twice, and that's through somebody I know. And so it's having those conversations and being clear about what I'm looking for. And just keep building that network, and just have as many conversations as you can, being clear with what you're about. More recently, I reached out to my old boss, who I've not seen for about 2 or 3 years. But again, he knows what I'm doing because I'm on social media. So he's got an idea of what I'm doing. We've had the odd conversation, but not massively. And I reached out to him, and like, I want to do more work in companies. And I think what I can do is mutually beneficial. Can we have a conversation? Can we have a catch up? And so it was as easy as to, like, even I went back to my very old boss, who I've not spoken to again for about 3 years, but I've not worked with for 7 or 8. And I was like, can we have a conversation? And because even though we've not stayed in touch, because I know we've got a strong relationship, I felt okay to do that. And I was working with somebody, and she was like, oh, she felt uncomfortable to reach out to people she knew from her past. Like, but if you kind of take the pressure off, it might not lead to anything. But wouldn't it just be nice to catch up with that person anyway? And she was like, oh, I can. And she was like, I'll write them. And she wrote like a page of why she wanted to talk to them, and that was going to be her connection email. I was just like, no, keep it simple. Just keep it simple. Just be like, hi, can we let's have a catch up. We haven't spoken for ages. By the way, I'm looking for a job. But or you can, you don't have to be dishonest about why you're meeting, but it doesn't have to be your sole focus.
Yeah. And Anita, I think you make a great point that around this, that there's almost this theme that you're talking around treating your career as if you're an entrepreneur. How powerful could that be? Really, really honing in your strengths, and networking like you're an entrepreneur, networking like you are your business. And in that way, you're picking out certain people that you're going to connect with related to what your strengths are, what you're good at. But you're also looking at, it might not be for this next job, right? You might just need a tactical, right now, I just need a job, I just need to get one. But what you're preparing for by building this network over the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever that looks like, you're preparing for that role that you want in 10 years time. That's the connections that you're building right now, is the role you want in 10 years, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think if you're clear on what you want, the impact that you want to create through your work, then it gets clearer about what roles you want and then what you can say no to. And I know that can be a bit difficult when you're under financial pressure, but you can start carving the career in the direction you want. You can start carving your network in the way that you want to, people you want to be connected with, that you're interested in being connected with. And I absolutely hate the word networking. It fills me with dread. It fills me with cringe. And But it was this time last year, actually, I went to a PMI event, and it was the most amazing event I've ever been to. It was, they were celebrating their 50th birthday, and they had an after party in Madame Tussauds, but I was going alone, and I was absolutely dreading networking. And at this point, I did have my own business. So I was like, oh, I need to build connections, and I feel icky. And but then when I just treat it as, it's just meeting people, it's just connecting. It doesn't necessarily mean, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to lead to anything, but it's just about meeting people that I want to in my world, and then we can, and if we do stay in each other's world, that's a bonus. And I took the pressure off, and it was about connecting. And I'm an introvert, so naturally I hate, and one of the things is I hate small talk. Like, I just don't do well with small talk. I'm like completely like, I don't want to talk about the weather. I mean, like, and but what I found at that event was I did, and for me, it wasn't about, I set myself a little target, and it wasn't about talk to 100 people. It was like, okay, talk to 5 people. And it was just like small steps, and it was just I just started having conversations like, how did you find the event? And yeah, and actually I found that by sharing what I do and what the impact that I want to create, and I was like, yeah, my business is around women and women and women in project management, and that led to conversations that were meaningful and deep, because then people were telling me their lifelong dreams, and people were telling me, and I was like, we've met for 5 minutes, but this is what like gets me going. This is the conversations I want to have. And I was talking to somebody who I'd met online, so we were in each other's network, but we'd never had a conversation, but we knew of each other at this event, and we're like, you're this person, and you're this person. And then we had the conversation, and because they already knew what I stood for, they already knew what I was about, and I knew a bit about him, that we had a meaningful conversation. And just in that conversation, he was like, so I talk about my my mission around women in project management, but then he started talking about race, because he was also Asian, and he was like, well, where I am, like, there are no Indians on the board. I'm like, well, why not be the first? And then afterwards he told me he applied for a position and got it. I was like, all just from a conversation. Like, how amazing is that? But yeah, so I think you find your own way to network, but you can take the pressure off, and you can make it about connecting. And I know we're not meeting people in person now, so that's a different dynamic. But how can you connect on social media? Events like this and groups like Jay creates and I create and other people, like, and which you're already doing because you're here. So so you're already doing it, and just find new, and again, it'd be a bit risky. Like, it's okay to stretch out your comfort zone. It's okay if it makes you nervous, but it doesn't have to be a leap that sets you in your panic zone. It can just be about, it makes me a little bit nervous. But being nervous is okay, because that nerves can be excitement as well.
I'm really sorry, I've got to leap off. I've got a call coming up, but thanks so much. I really enjoyed that, Anita, and good to meet the rest of you. Cheers.
Take care, Claire. Thank you.
Bye.
Do we have any other questions? Any other questions? If not, let's go to reflections. Just one thing that you're taking away from this conversation. Whether it's something you knew already, or something new, or just a question or an action that you're taking away. Conduct. Gemma, you happy to go first?
Yeah, I think the comment about sort of adding people on LinkedIn that you'd want to work with, I think that's a really good way of thinking about it and how to make connections. So I think just when I see posts popping up, I think especially when someone in my network has liked a post, those ones that pop up, having a little look at the person who's posted it, seeing their career path and being like, actually, yeah, that's a similar trajectory to what I want to do, and then adding them and seeing where it goes. Yeah,
amazing. And comment if you feel comfortable. Comment, because if you can see that person is potentially somebody that can help you, commenting or liking, we like that. People like that. So if you've done something for me and I remember that, I'm going to be, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, I'm going to remember that feeling that I got, or something that I got when I was like, yes, when somebody comments on my post right now, I'm like, yes, I love you, person. You know, so think about that as well, how you can add value to them in any way you can. I really admire Dr. Richard Claydon. He's an incredible human behavior scientist, and I love his work. He seemed like this on this pedestal type of person, you know, on LinkedIn, where they get like thousands of likes. And it just so happened we worked out that he needed some Canva designs done. What are they called, where you have infographics, right? And I am not a pro at Canva, but I was like, I loved his research, so I was like, oh, I've made an infographic, is this all right? He was like, yes, this is brilliant, are you able to do a couple more? And I was like, yes. And then he was sending me all of his research stuff that wasn't even out yet, and then he was inviting me to all of these meetings and telling everyone how I was helping him. And this person is like, in my world, is like up there. And suddenly I was up there with him just because I made some Canva infographics.
Yeah, my friend did something similar. Like a few years ago, we both listened to the podcast that came out from Kathy Caprino. And we were both like, oh my God, it's so amazing. He's like, I'm gonna get there. And I was like, you will. And now, like, it's probably been like 2, maybe even 3 years. I think it's about 2 years. And he got on her podcast now, and the other day she mentioned him, that she's just been speaking to my friend in the UK and mentioned his full name. And I was like freaking out, and I was like messaging him. I was like, oh my God, you made it. And she's been on his podcast already, and they had like chats, and he was just like, I'm gonna get to her. So he like kept messaging and commenting and everything on her LinkedIn. And he's gonna be on her podcast, I think early next year, when her book is being published in the UK.
Wow.
But yeah, he just did it through LinkedIn, just by like, I'm gonna get there. And yeah, it was so exciting for me to like, oh my God, she mentioned his name and she called him her friend. You know, she didn't just like mention him. And then it's amazing that you can make those connections online.
Definitely. Yeah. Awesome. Kim, for you, was that your biggest, or is there something?
I think, well, I've been doing that as well. I've been connecting with people online and getting work from that, so I'm familiar with that. I think what I got reminded of again, that, you know, I like staying in my comfort zone as well. And I basically only left my last job. Well, I used the opportunity to do a move to a different city to like get rid of the job I've been wanting to get rid of for over a year. And the new job I accepted now is totally freaking me out. I am very nervous because all of a sudden, I'm making that step up, and I'm going to be responsible for a lot of people. And like you said, you know, it's nervous, but those nerves can be very positive as well. So I think I'm trying to take that in and be like, you're gonna be fine, you're gonna do well, you know, they hired you for a reason, they will support you through it, like, you're not gonna do anything wrong.
And you think, like, all of those, you know, they get their jobs through their like uncles and their friends. Like, if they can do it, okay, you can go in there without that imposter syndrome and smash it. Like, that's what
I'm working on it. I'm working on that imposter. That is my biggest things I need to work on. So I really related with you there, Anita, saying those things, and it's just trying to manifest it now.
And you're doing it. You are doing it every day with the way how you show up in that job.
Amazing. Yeah, I definitely think my biggest takeaway was around you know, we're going to hear stories or comments around us, but it's us who kind of reinforce that story. We get to choose which ones we tap into. And unfortunately, our brains are wired to tap into far more of the negative than the positive. So we have to work harder at cultivating the right ones, and you know, and feeding the right ones rather than feeding the negative stories or the other ones. So that's the switch the message, I think, is a really, really powerful campaign. So Anita, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining. Take care.
Thanks everyone. Bye bye.